Well, we are still getting card reveals for the Return to Naxxramas mini set, and it is time for 3 more classes. So let's take a look at the cards that have been revealed today. First up, we have some warrior cards, which pretty interesting. I think warriors kind of been lacking in the last several metas. So let's take a look here. We have the Flesh Shaper, a 6 mana 3/8 undead with taunt and a battle cry. If you have 5 or more armor, summon a copy of this. This seems pretty solid of a card. It's got decent stats. I think the undead tag could potentially have some benefits. Maybe not necessarily in warrior, but maybe there's something that works with it. And there's definitely some things that could work with the taunt. I'm just not sure how good those synergies are for standard at this time. But in terms of the battle cry effect, I mean, having 5 armor is pretty obtainable. It's pretty easy to do as a warrior in general. So, and I'd imagine probably these decks that are running these taunt minions and really wanting to get a lot of benefit from these probably are leaning a little bit more towards a maybe not necessarily complete control, but they are running more tools that will give them armor to help them survive longer to get to these big taunts. So it seems pretty easy to accomplish having 5 armor to get a copy of this. So to me, this seems pretty good as a card overall. Then next up, we have the Hook Fist 3000, and this is a mech and a pirate. It is 3 mana for 3, and after your hero attacks, gain 4 armor and draw a card. Pretty aggressively statted for a 3 mana. Typically, that straightforward stat line would be 3 mana for a 3/3. So it has that extra attack in there. And after your hero attacks, if you have some way to attack multiple times, you could get this effect. If this sticks on the board, you can get this effect over multiple turns. So it seems pretty easy, again, to actually get this to work. A lot of the things that warrior, kind of tends to do in general is attacking, and especially with a lot of the variations we've seen with pirates, there's also a big heavy focus on attacking and weapon synergies. So this seems, again, like it could probably fit pretty easily and be pretty easily used and accomplished. But gaining 4 armor and drawing a card at the same time after you attack, pretty nice effect there. I think this is definitely a solid card to put into maybe like a pirate warrior. I'm not sure if this will see play in every warrior deck, but I think even a somewhat, resource heavy warrior that really just wants to like draw through the deck, gain the armor, they might not necessarily care if they are focused on pirates. They might put this in for the armor and draw effect instead of using it for that aggressive stat line. And then we have Training Session. It is a 1 mana spell. Discover a taunt minion. If you play it this turn, repeat this. Kind of interesting in the way that I think a lot of the taunt minions tend to be a little bit higher cost. So if you want this effect more than once, you probably have to play it minimum mid-game, if not later, which does, I guess, give you more benefit if you end up top decking this later in the game. But early on, you're really probably not going to be getting that effect unless you're picking some taunt that is only 2 or 3 mana potentially. But even at that point, you're still probably playing this on turn 4, probably at the earliest, to get that double effect. And you do have to play that taunt minion at the time. So if it's something that's not very good, then you still have to end up playing it to get the effect. They're really trying to make Taunt Warrior a thing, and they're really trying to push that like taunt archetype for Warrior. And for Standard, it really has not kind of stuck. We really have not seen Taunt Warrior itself be an actual archetype that is at even the top several tiers in the meta for Standard decks. So I'm definitely curious to see if this actually takes like a taunt deck farther, but ultimately, at least right now, before we have rotation in April, I kind of suspect that this still probably won't really see any play in standard. And we have the Mage cards. The first one here, Tear Reality. This is a 4 mana arcane spell. Add 2 random mage spells from the past to your hand, and they cost 2 less. So for standard, this means cards from Wild will potentially be seen again in standard. This is kind of an interesting thing. I think we've seen some similar effects, but them costing less is pretty significant. The randomness is really kind of been a hit or miss for standard competitiveness and like the tier level for decks. So in terms of how good, quote unquote, like good this card will be for like top meta decks for standard, I don't particularly see this being all that great. But the randomness and discounting plus the potential generation combined with other cards that are already in standard could make this card actually see play and benefit. But I know I've already seen people on like social media talking about things like Ice Block and some other cards. And while that might happen, there are so many cards and spells from sets previous from over the years that it seems very unlikely that that will actually be a consistent like spell that's actually found. So to me, that just means that it's even more unlikely that you will find a spell that you really truly want to find with this. And it really just leads to that random. And if you like the chaos, you like the random, you like that, then this card's for you. But in terms of just for standard and like competitive, I probably don't expect this card to be super impactful in a ton of mage decks. Then we have Spectral Trainee, a 3 mana 1/4 undead. And it says, after you cast a spell, deal 1 damage to all enemy minions. Now, this card has a lot of flexibility to it. It has that little bit of higher health, so for some decks, it might be a little bit more tricky to kill. A lot of the decks and classes in Standard have, maybe spells that deal 3, but not the 4 damage. So that health here on this will help this stay alive a little bit longer. And the fact that it's a little bit flexible with just being able to cast a spell, right? It doesn't have to be a specific like arcane spell. It doesn't have to be fire spells. There's no like specific spell school to it. It's just a spell in general. So being able to deal repetitive AoE damage to all enemy minions specifically, not even kill off your own stuff at the same time, I definitely can see this being incredibly impactful in the meta, especially with how popular things like Unholy Death Knights have become, where that is just getting on the board with decently small minions. And with this trainee being 3 mana, even mid-game, you can play this on turn 5 or 6 and still have the mana to play a couple of really cheap spells. So this seems like it definitely has some potential. It might depend how often it's used in Standard over the time it's going to be in Standard. Like how it fluctuates in the meta will depend on the other decks, I think, being played. But right now, this seems like a pretty sweet card. And then we have Whirlweaver, a 3 mana 4/3 elemental Naga. Again, kind of that aggressive stat line we saw with a warrior card as well. Battle cry, if you've cast a spell last turn, discover an elemental. Now, there's not a ton of elementals for Mage, so I actually think that this is a pretty neat card. It does require you to kind of plan your turns a little bit. You have to have had a spell played the previous turn, not just like right before you want to play this. So you do kind of have to plan a sequence of turns a little bit. But in a lot of the Mage decks, it seems pretty easy to kind of actually work in a spell every turn so that you kind of have this effect. We've seen effects like that even in the past with things like Elemental Shaman, where a lot of those cards were dependent on you having played an elemental the previous turn. So from that experience, I definitely think that this is absolutely feasible and probably a bit easier to pull off that battle cry effect than what it might initially seem. So for me, I love this card. I don't know if this is going to be played in every single mage deck. Maybe some variations of Big Spell Mage want to play this, but I really doubt that. This probably fits into more of those aggro mage, the more arcane spell focused, or potentially for a little while, even the quest mage that has kind of started to come back, but not really been as popular. So really cool card. I like this, and I kind of see it being played in those decks in Standard. And then, of course, we have Demon Hunter, and this first one is kind of a throwback to the old card Zombie Chow, but this one is Shambling Chow. I love this so much. But Demon Hunter cards, a 1 mana 2/3 undead, so really good stats for the 1 mana. It has Rush, so it can impact the board immediately, but it does have a Death Rattle, deal 4 damage to your hero. There are some ways to kind of get around that Death Rattle, potentially a little buff, or maybe this just getting, killed off after a little while. And then Demon Hunter does have some ways to heal, weapons, or even just gaining that essentially that back in health. If you play Kurtrus, the hero card, you get 5 armor, so that kind of just counteracts this 4 damage. This is a pretty great card, I think. And again, with that Death Rattle, a lot of players might want to look at this and say, this is bad because you take damage. But being able to play this on turn 1, potentially even 2 of them, if you have coin and both in your hand, a turn 1 double 2/3 bodies on the board is going to be pretty difficult for a lot of decks to answer that early. So there is that little bit of downside of taking that health when these die. There are ways to silence. I don't really know if Demon Hunters are going to want to try to actually put that in their decks or anything to try to silence these. To me, that seems a little bit just unnecessary. But this seems like a fantastic card for some of those more aggressive Demon Hunters, or just being able to start getting some bodies out early. And it has that undead tag, so we might start to see a little bit more undead synergy in Demon Hunters. And then we have a weapon, because of course Demon Hunters need their weapons. This is Calamities Grasp, a 1 mana, 1 attack, 2 durability weapon with a Death Rattle. Add a random outcast card to your hand. Now, with this being a Death Rattle on the weapon, that means if you have another weapon, you can play out the new one and it will trigger that Death Rattle effect. You can use both of the durabilities, and then once that second durability is used up, that Death Rattle effect will go off. I definitely have seen people trying and experimenting some with Outcast Demon Hunter. It still does really rely heavily on getting some of the kind of better Outcast cards and being able to use them, and being able to play stuff from out of your hand in kind of the correct ways and orders. The benefit to a lot of that Outcast stuff is that the way that it puts a new card into your hand kind of already sets it up for that Outcast effect to be active. So it is kind of helpful there. But for me, this is just a pretty weak weapon that I think at the time being, Demon Hunter already has some better early weapons that they probably just want to use, unless they're really leaning into the Outcast synergy here for this. So maybe after rotation and a new expansion in April, maybe this is something that players will try out even more because they need a weapon. But for the time being, I really only kind of see it being played in that one fringe Outcast Demon Hunter deck. And then lastly, we have the Fellscale Evoker. It is a large Demon and Naga combo here. 6 mana, 5/7. Battlecry, if you've cast 3 spells while holding this, summon a different demon from your deck. We have seen this effect of casting 3 spells while you're holding this. That is a very common like Naga type theme. And then pulling demons out of the deck. We've seen that before with demons. I'm not really sure if I think if I like this. Honestly, I think this seems just meh. It doesn't really seem very great to me. It feels like it has a lot of requirements, and honestly, people have tried to do like big demon stuff in Demon Hunter, and I just think most of the time it really hasn't worked. And to try to force this into your hand and be playing multiple spells and then still have other demons in the deck that you want to pull out, it just seems like way too many requirements. So I really don't think that this is all that great of a card. But what do you think of these cards? Are any of these huge standout cards to you? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for checking this out. And if you didn't get a chance to check out the cards from yesterday, I recommend you checking this video out next. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.